So welcome everybody to our latest DBio online workshop. So I am Nancy Ford, and I am a faculty member at Simon Fraser University, and I am also a member of the APS Division of Biological Physics. And one of the things that we've been doing in DBio over the last few years, initiated during the pandemic and continuing, is to bring together our community online with different events that we feel could be of interest. So I'm just going to briefly share my screen so that you can see how to learn more about our events if you are interested. So if you just Google APS DBio, you will quickly find this home screen for our division with lots of links. If you click on workshops and networking, then you'll see a list of a whole lot of events that have run roughly monthly over the last couple of years. You can learn more about them. And what's nice is that if you are interested in learning more about an event that already happened, you can watch the recording of the event on YouTube. So all of these are archived for the purposes of members of our community and of the broader biological physics community to learn from. We have some more events coming up monthly before the March meeting. They aren't listed here yet because we have to confirm the details, but visit back here and see what events are coming up and whether you're interested in joining us. And of course, I would also encourage everyone, if you are not a member of the APS and our Division of Biological Physics, but you feel like that resonates with you, I would encourage you to join. It's a great opportunity to get involved. All right, so with that sort of background out of the way, it is my great pleasure to be the host and moderator for this month's event. We have 4 panelists joining us today who have all successfully, very successfully, I would say, made the transition from their PhD research in biological physics into careers outside of academia. So we have Brian Jackson joining us from D.E. Shaw Research in Manhattan, Teddy Hay joining us from Immunometrics based in Eugene, Oregon. We have Cassandra Neiman joining us from Element Biosciences in San Diego, and Nakhmeh Rezai joining us from Google in the Bay Area. So the way we're going to structure this event is I've prepared a few questions about sort of general things for the panelists to answer. And so we'll get to hear from each of the 4 panelists answering each of the questions. We aim that this should take up about half hour or so, and maybe a little bit more, but we want to leave plenty of time at the end of the event for questions and answers from you, our participants. So start thinking of any questions you might have that come up during their responses to the organized questions, and then we'll have a chance for some Q&A at the end. Awesome. So with that, let's get started. So I think I'll go through the order in which you appear on my screen for the first question. So that'll be Brian, then Teddy, then Cassie, then Nakhmeh. And what I'd like you to do is tell us a little bit about what it is that you are doing now. So what is your job outside of academia? What are your responsibilities? So Brian.
Sure. Thank you, Nancy. So I work at a company called D.E. Shaw Research. We build special purpose supercomputers targeted for drug discovery. So we build it from the ground up. That means we design the ASIC, we design the software, the board, the machines, the interconnection, all of everything together in order to run molecular dynamics simulations of biological macromolecules. So proteins or DNA or RNA, and also drug molecules that might bind to those proteins. And in particular, what I do is I'm a program manager. That means that I focus on helping to organize the team to build said machine. So that's scope, schedule, and budget. So I help the team decide what we're going to do, what are all the dependencies from team to team, from discipline to discipline. And then I also try to figure out how much roughly things will cost, track it over time, and make sure that everything gets done. And that's pretty much what I do.
Awesome. Thank you. Teddy.
Yeah, I'm So I founded a company immediately after graduating 4 years ago, and it is probably the only time that you'll hear machine learning applied to urination. So what we've done is we've built some machine learning tech that can measure urinary flow rate just from the sound of someone peeing into toilet water. And so, you know, my father's a urologist. He was pitching a million ideas at me of businesses that he wanted someone else to start for him. And I was swatting away almost all of them successfully, and this one kind of stuck. I was working in Raghu Parthasarathy's lab at University of Oregon and doing a lot of, you know, machine learning on complex noisy biological image data. And so extending it to 2D audio data was kind of a no-brainer. And what's exciting about it is it's a software-only medical device. So we're currently selling into urology clinics. First couple of years was developing the robust and accurate machine learning tech, getting a patent in the space. I have no, you know, I really did not have strong career aspirations a decade ago, and had no expectation that this is where I would be. But you know, I'm now transitioned out of being a technical co-founder and into being a CEO. We've got 5 full-time people. We're still early stage. You know, we've got customers in 5 different states in the US, all private practice urology clinics, and sort of now focusing on sales and ramping up revenue. So my day-to-day kind of changes, and a lot of it is diving into the stuff that I'm not very good at but needs to be done. And as soon as I get, you know, okay at it, someone else takes over and I go and do something I'm not good at again. So happy to be, please connect, happy to be really transparent about the process. I think there's a lot of mythology out there about starting your own business, and a lot of it's incorrect. So please, yeah, please reach out. I'm happy to be transparent.
Great, thank you, Teddy. Cassie.
Yeah, so I'm a staff systems engineer at Element Biosciences, and Element is a company that's making a DNA sequencer and other biological or tools for biologists. My role, the company is pretty young. It was founded in 2017, so my role has changed a lot as it is a startup, and that you often change roles in a startup. So I work on testing equipment, making sure that it works, troubleshooting, as well as coordinating lots of different engineers and scientists to make sure that we're meeting the goals. I'm very much on the hardware side, also working with people in manufacturing and some automation. And now my role is a lot more project management. So making sure that we're getting all the small details right for implementing a larger project goal, and maintaining sort of like the customer in mind, and you know, that kind of thing. So it's very day to day, and it's changed just over the past 3 years, but that's sort of how startups go. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Nagme.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Nagme, and I'm a research scientist at Google. I was part of the Fitbit R&D team 3 years ago. I was a staff data scientist, and our company got acquired by Google. And since then, I've been in the consumer health and AI research team. And my work, very high level, involves developing AI-powered tools and features that help to promote well-being and also healthier lifestyle, helping users to be more healthy and also better understanding health, different aspects of it. And as a senior research scientist, my role involved identifying the areas that can be improved. And I don't know if I need to explain like what Fitbit does. So there are features that are in the app side, and also there are wearables. And I mostly work on the algorithm side and the features that you see in the app. And so my work involves, I usually work on either a big project or multiple small projects, trying to set the directions and the tools and the resources for that project, and establishing the milestones. And usually these problems are pretty ambiguous, defining the steps that need to solve that ambiguous problem, implementing solutions, developing models, Also collaborating very closely with cross-functionally with bigger teams to implement and integrate the solutions that we develop in the research side. We also contribute to the scientific community by publishing and collaborating with academics. And also I coordinate and mentor junior members and sometimes the student researchers in my work. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Great, thank you. Thank you, all of you, for that information about what it is you're doing. So now we're going to go back in time and we're going to start with your academic training. I imagine that many of our participants are currently in a PhD or postdoc, maybe other positions as well. So I'd like to know something about what your academic background and training was like. Some of you have hinted to what you did, but what was it? And then when during your academic training, or maybe all of your life, I don't know, did you start to consider a non-academic career path? And so what we're going to do this time is start with Teddy and then go to Cassandra, Nakme, Brian. So we'll rotate the starting person each time. So Teddy.
Yeah, great. So, you know, as I hinted at, I was never very career oriented. And honestly, I was a bit of a problem child in high school. And you know, got some really bad grades in a couple classes, and was yeah, luckily I got into Reed College in Portland, Oregon, and that's where I really met high quality, you know, beautiful education. And so the physics department there was, yeah, I mean, it was a really sort of eye-opening and excellent experience for me, where grades just, you know, were in the background, and it was all about education and further learning. Very little career preparation, I think, famously. And so at the end of it, you know, I was very interested in medicine, so I got my EMT training. In terms of non-academic backgrounds, you know, I went through slowly. I took a year off, worked construction, and then traveled a little bit, and ended up teaching in India. Came back, finished my degree, and then worked as a medical scribe to keep, you know, medicine open. And kind of got to a point where I felt like, you know, if I end up dying with this level of understanding of physics, I'll be a little dissatisfied, and that was honestly the driving force to go into graduate school. So, you know, not very career oriented. But during graduate school, I started doing a ton of image processing and machine learning. Sorry, I set a timer for myself. And really fell in love with machine learning. And so, you know, I knew that this was a skill set I really wanted to develop, and that's kind of what led into my current role.
Great, thanks. Sandra.
Sorry, did you say Cassie?
Yes, Cassie. Sorry, I know you as Cassie, but maybe you should, do you prefer Cassie?
Oh, you said Cassandra. Okay, sorry. Yeah, either one's fine, but
Okay.
I just didn't hear it. But yeah, so my academic background, I studied physics at UCSD in undergrad, and then I went to University of Oregon to start my PhD in physics. I actually followed a professor after 1 year to Lund University, so I just left with a master's and started it in Sweden in the PhD program there, and I was doing biophysics, studying molecular motors and lipid bilayers and various things with nanostructures, using microscopy. It was a very microscopy heavy PhD, and microfluidics. And then I did a postdoc back at UCSD, building a fancy microscope to study cells and doing cell biology. So I was getting more into like the applications, but still doing microscopy. Yeah, and I guess I started considering non-academic jobs probably even before my PhD, but I thought, you know, I'll see how this goes because I really like studying physics. So maybe mid PhD, I realized I don't think that I really want to pursue being a professor, but I'm not sure. And it's just sort of solidified through and into the postdoc. And yeah, so I guess when I was doing my postdoc, I was pretty aware that I didn't want to stay in that. And it's a little different in physics than in cell biology, or the department I was in, at least. They do like 6-year postdocs, and I wasn't ready for that. So I finished my enough of my project to feel okay about it and then jump shift to industry.
Great, thanks. Nakme.
Yeah, so my academic training has been in physics all the way from undergrad to PhD. I did my undergrad in Iran and then moved to Canada to Simon Fraser University for my graduate studies. I first started my research in solid-state physics to study wonderful superconductors. And then shortly after I started, I learned about applications of physics in biology, and I learned about biophysics. And I met Nancy, and I joined her research group. And so I switched my focus to biophysics, and I studied protein structures and their folding dynamics for my PhD. I guess for pretty much entire graduate school, I was considering academic direction, except the last year when I started writing my thesis, and I started a fascination for biotech and industry, but I wasn't sure. I was writing my thesis remotely from Bay Area, and I started going to different events, both academic, like there were talks in Stanford University, Berkeley, and also there were a lot of hackathons and industry events that I was going and learning about both directions. And I noticed, oh, I want to really learn more about industry. So next I'm going to move to industry and then stay there for a while and then decide if I want to switch direction back to academia. I ended up actually finding a common ground now, being a researcher in industry. But yeah, that's my journey, how I ended up in industry after my grad school.
Great, thanks, Nakme. Brian.
All right, so I studied chemistry, both in undergrad and at graduate school at Berkeley. And when I started graduate school, I was confident that I wanted to be an academic because I really enjoyed research. The reason I ultimately decided against it was a realization that in order to be an academic, I'd have to be willing to move anywhere in the country. And that was something that was untenable to me. There were only two places I wanted to live. One was the Bay Area, which meant Cal or Stanford, or New York, which meant NYU or Columbia. And just the improbability of getting a position at one of those four universities, and the amount of work I would have to do to try to land that low probability event just was untenable to me. So instead, I decided to, similar to our last speaker, go into research in industry. So I started at IBM Research, and now I'm here at D.E. Shaw Research. So I can get a lot of the same, scratch that research itch, but in industry.
Great, thank you. All right, so now we've kind of heard what it was that made you think about paths taking you to industry. And what I think would be nice to hear about is that pathway. And some of you have hinted at this a little bit, but how easy, first of all, was it to find that first position that was not in an academic setting? I think that step can be really daunting and seem like it could be very difficult for many people. So be as honest as you can about this process. And then what did you do to facilitate the transition? So if, what kind of active steps did you take along your journey? So we're going to start with Cassie this time.
Yeah, so I went from my postdoc to working at Nikon, who makes microscopes, and I was doing their customer support and sales and training and lots of different aspects. And for me, I had applied to other positions and it was difficult to get an interview, but I knew the microscope reps because I had worked with them on our microscopes. And they knew my abilities and had asked if I was interested. So that was a really good opportunity. And I would also say that many of the people I worked with who were in that position didn't have microscope experience specifically, but Nikon at least trains you really well. So they train you on how to use every microscope they sell, basically, which is a really big range. So it's a very good opportunity also to meet people, in my case in San Diego, Arizona, Utah, and Hawaii, in biotech, as well as in academic settings. And I got to know what my customers were doing and get an idea of what was available out there, as well as grow my network. So now some of my customers that I worked with quite a bit are now just part of my network, that I can reach out to in the future. They can reach out to me, and that's happened. So like one of my coworkers was a former customer because I recommended him for the job at Element. The big thing for me is networking. I think most of the jobs I've had, I knew somebody at Element. I knew somebody from grad school who was working there already. He was a postdoc when I was a grad student. So it is possible to find jobs without the network, but for me, that made it so much easier. And so just don't be afraid to reach out to people that you haven't talked to in 5 years. And I think that everybody kind of knows how it goes and would rather, help you out. They're not going to, if they just ignore your message, what's the worst that happens, right? So just reach out and talk to people.
Great, thanks. Nakme.
Yeah, for me, this question has two parts. First is to figure out what role I wanted to go to. I was graduated from physics, worked on proteins, so I knew a little bit of biology, lab processes. I knew machine learning, computer vision, and I knew physics. I didn't know what is a role for me and where I can go, which kind of companies I should reach to. And that was a challenging time for me to establish where I want to go, know which companies to target. And it took me a while to figure out. I was talking to a lot of people, followed different trajectories of people transitioning careers. And when I was looking for, when I was in that stage, data science was relatively newer field. And it was when I learned about data science and machine learning roles, I was like, oh, that's interesting, because it's an area that from many different STEM fields and different other fields people join, and there seem to be a interesting career path for it. So once I figured out, that was like a new era for me too. It was a very a big task, it's scary for me, but then I knew what the direction is. I started identifying the gaps, the knowledge gap, the skills gaps, and also understanding what are my strengths and what would be my unique brand to establish myself in the field. And that was another journey to find a job in industry. I guess I did my education in biophysics, and I was in Canada, and I was in the US at the time of looking for a job. So all my network were mostly in Canada or biophysics community. So I had to establish that network. I learned about a intensive 7-week data science fellowship program. It was called Insight Data Science. There is still operating. It was a fascinating experience. I started Insight, and I got to expand my knowledge, my network, and get to know a lot of to-be data scientists from that experience. And also part of that, I was paired with the industry with a startup. That was actually when I first started working with an actual industry and actual real world problem. And that was it. Since then, there were lots of interviews and figuring things out. The thing is that the interview process is very nonlinear, and it's varying from company to company. And I was applying to companies after I finished my fellowship, but you don't know, some processes take weeks, some are super fast. I ended up at some point, I ended up with 4 offers from 2 startups, 1 big tech advertisement team, and a nonprofit organization in the health space. And I was like, I was reminding my first thoughts when I decided to go into industry. I was like, I really like biotech. I really like sequencing industry. I really like the health space. So I reached out to Illumina company at the time. I was like, I have these offers. These are really pressing, but I'm really interested in the role that you had. They had a role for founding data scientists in the clinical genomics, and they really expedited the process. And I ended up getting the job. And that was my first non-academic full-time industry job as a founding data scientist in the clinical genomics team of the Illumina.
Great. Thanks, Nahme. A lot of good advice there. Brian.
So the important thing for me, at least, was luck. I think they say that it's better to be lucky than good, and I certainly was very lucky in my career path. So right after graduate school, I went to a couple job fairs, went to a couple industry talks, et cetera, and I would bring resumes with me, and I remember handing them out. I did, in full disclosure, immediately after grad school, I took a job, which was a very big mistake, solely for money. And it was not a very good experience. It was the worst of all worlds in that you had to work very hard, plus it was not very interesting. So you had to work hard, but on something that wasn't very interesting. Luckily for me, one of those resumes that I just handed out blindly hit a little bit of pay dirt, where someone from IBM Research called me and said, "Hey, do you want to interview with my group?" And I'd never formally applied to IBM Research, and the interviews went well, and I ended up going there to IBM Research, and then someone from D. Shaw Research just reached out and said, "Hey, do you want to apply here?" And I said, "Sure." And I didn't really know how challenging it was to get a job at D. Shaw Research, but I just came along and did the interviews, and that ended up working out. So just being, to be honest, my wife makes fun of me in that she's like, "Oh, you just got a cereal box and your whole career came out of the little prize you got inside of that." And that's kind of been very similar to my actual career so far.
Awesome. Thanks. It is good to know that good luck can shine on people. Teddy.
Yeah, so I think that, prior to graduate school, I had worked as a medical scribe. I got my EMT training. I had taken time off during Reed, and a lot of that was strong preparation and just diving in and trying new things. I've always been a little afraid of having just a single sort of long-term job for the rest of my life. And then within graduate school, I was when I joined Raghu's lab, a lot of it was out of interest in the work that he was doing on light sheet fluorescent microscopy, so 4D imaging of larval zebrafish, where you fluorescently labeled individual bacteria in the gut of these transparent baby fish, and you can see them in real time. You can see them swimming around in the gut. And then also the host cells, the zebrafish cells, are autofluorescent, and so you can see them as well. You can tag neutrophils, so you can go in and really see this living system in real time without killing the organism, which is great. And so I fell in love with a lot of the image processing and machine learning, and in doing so realized that I wanted to be doing something with that skill set. And then I also thought this is kind of the time to start my own venture if possible. I knew that was going to become quite a bit harder as time went on. And so both of those things kind of converged to testing out a couple different ideas, connecting with a few people who were similarly interested in starting a business, and finding the right person, and then diving into that. And it was very hard to start with. We worked for no money, very stressful, and had to fundraise, and just a lot of hard work But continually learning the entire time, which has been really rewarding.
Great. All right, thank you all. So we're on to the last of the prepared questions. And that is, I want you to look back in time. Imagine that you, with all your experience now, is meeting with your younger self earlier in their career. And maybe say during your PhD or even undergraduate days, depending on where you feel you would most like to talk to your younger self. And what advice would you give to them for their future and what they could do at that time in order to figure things out? So we will start with Nakme this time.
Yeah, so this is actually an interesting question because our brain and experiences always develop. And I don't know if I give the advice to myself back in time, I would actually listen. But if I have my current brain and I go back, I think two types of advice I would give myself. One is a lot of the time in academia, we work on prototyping a solution, especially when it comes to software and technical work. And we don't think about how this solution can fit in a more complex system, like what is used at bigger companies or in industry. I guess I would, one of the advices is to really learn about the processes and best practices in the industry and adopt those from early on in all the developments. And some examples, very basic examples are version control, collaborative documents, and also processes like agile development, milestones, iterative processes, and postmortems, etc. at a very set times and not too far apart. So it helps like with quick development and growing and getting to the goal that you have for your career, for my career. Also, another advice is to be honest to self, to what direction you really want to go. And we don't always know what's best for us. We don't know all the answers, but by continuously asking this question every once in a while, we can identify what we need to know and what are the dark areas, blind spots that we don't know. And then asking this question that is the current path that you're in, getting you closer to what you're gonna get to. And also telling myself that it's okay to change minds, it's okay to change path. We always grow, situation change. So this is why we need to constantly ask these questions of ourselves. So a set of questions I would give myself to always revisit every few months that I can tell you. One is what is the one next step that mostly move me to forward in my goal, and what barriers I might face to achieve that, and what are the acceptable and unacceptable outcomes look like in this path, and what's important to me about it, and what am I doing well, and what can I do better. I guess these two general advice is what I will give myself.
That sounds like fantastic advice. All right, Brian.
So I would give myself 3 pieces of advice, and they're all very orthogonal to each other. The first is take more math classes. So I never took linear algebra, yet nevertheless, I have to know it. It's just a very important piece of math training, and I'm sure there's many others. The second is taking more risks in my research as a graduate student. So I took research projects that I thought had a high likelihood of success, but didn't have necessarily the biggest impact on scientific literature. The fallacy of that view is that if I had taken on projects that had a higher potential impact, the probability of them succeeding was likely about the same. I was probably very bad at assessing the likelihood of success for each. So I might as well just take on the ones that have the bigger likely impact, which I did not do. The third piece of advice I would give myself is just do not be scared of trying new things in new disciplines and new subjects that are very different from your training up until now. What graduate school should teach you and what you should learn is that you can learn anything and that nothing is out of reach for you to learn. And therefore, going after that subject or that area is perfectly fine and you should do it. So for instance, machine learning is big, it's hot, it's a real deal. If you don't have any background on it, it doesn't matter. You can learn it fast enough to come up to speed and to contribute.
Great. Thank you very much, Brian, for those very different pieces of advice. Teddy.
Yeah, this is fun to hear. I think I'll be building off of what all the other three panelists have already spoke to. And so first, I just want to say I wouldn't give myself any advice because I'd be very afraid that I would change my path and I wouldn't have my 2.5-year-old daughter. But setting that aside, I think for me, a huge one is trusting your intuition, which is, a little bit counter to what we learn within physics. Obviously, intuition can introduce bias. It can be extremely, it can be extremely damaging to following a true scientific method, which is a great framework, a great model that you should always be applying and using. But you should also be really tapping into your instincts and intuition if you're that kind of person. And then, building on take more risks, as Brian just said. I love that. And diving in and trying new things frequently and making mistakes. Critically, getting yourself into a position where you can make a lot of mistakes. You can look stupid in front of a group of people, and go back and analyze why you made the mistakes and be really comfortable with that. Get used to pitching ideas and having people say no. And try things before you're necessarily ready, and really try to build sort of a rich set of experiences that you can draw from to kind of build out your intuition and your instincts. Jumping into the cold water is really important. Another thing that Brian mentioned was that a lot of his non-academic career training came from luck, and it also sounds like it came from being opportunistic. Like, if you're putting yourself in a lot of different scenarios, if you're taking those risks, then you can evaluate in the instant, what's the correct path. And just being willing to say yes to things can be a really, really good path. And then Cassandra was saying how important networking is. That's something that I really overlooked throughout my entire life. I would do problem sets by myself. I was really into working alone and never enjoyed going to parties or anything. But finding the honest way, the way for yourself, whoever you are, to honestly network and go through it in a way that you're very comfortable with is crucial, I think. And then collaboration is also vital. So really learning to work together with others is a really important sort of skill set. And then building a little bit on what Naghmeh was talking about, just diving in and analyzing what you're good at and what you love, like what makes you happy at the end of the day, and then what you're good at but drains you at the end of the day. And really learning to tease out what those different things are, not even necessarily what role you want, but just like what are the individual things, and then trying to categorize them. And then, what are you really bad at and hate doing, and be honest with yourself about it. And you can build up that framework and have that, hopefully guide you into positions that make you happy at the end of the day.
Great advice, Teddy. And Cassie, last word to you on this.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of really great advice. I guess one thing that I didn't really expect that I would like to tell my previous self is that all the time I spent on sort of like the soft skills in my PhD are actually really valuable now. And a lot of people don't get the opportunity that we get during our PhDs to work on those things, like our presentation skills, how we communicate to each other. When you write a paper, you have to think about who your audience is, for example. And I also had to do tasks that I thought were holding me back from doing research, like managing labs, ordering things, like all of that sort of coordination. But all of that is really useful if you can do it. Because I'm practiced at it, I think I can do it more quickly, get it done quickly, and then I could get to the more interesting parts. Everybody has to do a little bit of it. And so understanding that those kinds of things are actually very valuable later on, in addition to the technical things that you learn during your PhD or studies, whatever you're working on. So I would say, like, just try to appreciate that and take advantage of whatever opportunities you have. I'm currently managing people who are like, have a bachelor's and maybe a couple years of experience in industry. And they need to, like one, for example, needs to find a course on presentation skills. And I was very fortunate. It was sort of like handed to me during my PhD. So like those kinds of things really are very valuable and will be useful in industry as well as in academia. So whatever you do.
Excellent. Well, that's a nice variety of advice, and hopefully for the people who are watching, have been listening, that some of this resonates for you. So this concludes sort of the formal organized part of the event, and we still have about 20 minutes left for questions and answers. So if you have a question for the panelists, I would ask you if you're able to put up your hand in Zoom, because that way I can see who has a question and it'll tell me the order in which hands were raised. And if you are not on a computer or working in an environment where you can ask a question yourself, you can type it into the chat, and then I will read off the questions as they come in on the chat as well. So yes. All right, our first one, Chinmay.
Hi, thank you everyone for like all the beautiful and important insights. So I have a question for Nakme. You said like it's important to have industrial mindset as you are working through your PhD if you want to transition there. Can you elaborate more on that? How can we learn about this mindset while staying in the academia?
Oh, that's a great question. Actually, I don't think that's a blocker. Like if academic milestones or like how academic research are done is not necessarily the same as industry. Like there are different processes, the timelines are different, the sources. Like in academia, it's grant money and citations. In industry, and I'm very overgeneralizing this area. In industry, it's users, impact, scalability. So it can be a little bit different, but I guess it really depends on the subject that you're studying. Any internship opportunities can give you a window to how things are done in an academic setting. And especially there are research internships across different companies. I think those will be good resources. Also, like just reading about what are the best practices. And I'm mostly talking about like mostly software area, software development and machine learning in the product setting and like a scalable setting. But it's not that if you didn't use those in your PhD, you won't be able to survive in industry. It's good it helps actually with moving faster and developing more scalable tools during academic, if needed. Great question.
Thank you so much.
Great. Other questions? Don't be shy. Any question is, here's your chance to ask. Putting it in the chat or raising your hand.
If it's okay, Fatima asked a question in the chat and I very briefly answered it, but I wanted to also mention that the field of machine learning and AI is moving super fast. Like from week to week, there are new papers, new models, and new direction. And everything moves so fast that the solutions that got me started maybe many years ago is going to be very different from now. And there's so many great new resources there are that are available. And yeah, just take advantage of everything that is offered. And most of them are free. It's very available many of the resources, courses in machine learning and deep learning if anybody is interested to study. And also just follow the news, follow the papers that are important or highly cited in the field to keep you on top of the innovations would be a good strategy also.
Great. Thanks, Nahme. Prithviraj.
Hi, everyone. It was wonderful hearing about your stories and journey. So I had a couple of questions, not really directed towards one person, but sort of my own situation. So I really resonated with me the story of Teddy. He said he thinks that networking is very important, but he also found it to be difficult for him to pursue networking. So I find myself in similar situation, but he also talked about being honest with what works for you and what does not. So do you have any other suggestions, anyone, what really sort of would be a balance? Like if you find it difficult to network, but if you think it's important, how should you approach it? And the second question being, when we do research for academia, we don't really have very hard deadlines. But whenever I talk to my friends who are in academia, they always talk about this time pressure of delivering a project on a certain time. So how are your experiences on that, and how you deal with it transitioning from an academic background to career in industry?
Two great questions. Maybe we'll start with Teddy because you were mentioned in the first one. So talking about networking, and then also a question about time pressures.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just speak to my own experience with it. So I love both of your questions, and yeah, networking is important. So one of the things I know about myself is if I'm at some fundraising event with a bunch of potential VCs, I kind of shrivel up. I don't really like, chit-chatting and having, cocktails or something. So what I've done is, I love people and finding people that, you trust and are engaged with. Ask them, tell them be honest, be kind of blunt, be transparent about where you are, where you're thinking, and find people that they can connect you to. And then harass that person. And if they don't write back to you, say, hey, bringing this back to the top of your busy inbox. Keep everyone's super busy, but so many people want to help. Every single person in this panel, reach out to any of us afterwards, and we can connect you to a bunch of people as well. So just get out there with those one-on-one connections and just start, getting yourself in front of people and just being blunt. The way you're bringing up these questions, it's apparent that to me that you have pretty strong direction. So the other thing with academia, no hard deadlines. How do you transition into this? I think this touches a lot on what Nagme was bringing up and considerably bringing up on those soft skills, the kind of industry skills that aren't really found in a lot of PhD programs. Like set your own deadlines. Start by tracking your time. Like do a lot of bring in some of the tools that you find in industry and see how you do with it. I think that's one place to start.
Great.
Thank you. I think that's a good perspective on the second question.
Awesome.
For the first question, I would just say, think about if someone was to come to you, would you be annoyed by their questions? How would you prefer they approach you, and do that? Because everyone's kind of in the same boat, or we have been at some point. So I think that people are very understanding. I don't like just cold calling people or cold emailing people, but if I find a position open at a company, even if it's not a position that I'm necessarily a good fit for, and I know them on LinkedIn, I'll reach out to them. Or if they have a second connection who's, I'm related to for that job, I'll reach out on LinkedIn so that it's more targeted and specific. And I think that can be really useful. And I've taken phone calls from second connections too, just to talk about where I'm working and what I'm doing. Yeah. And then I think also just pinging and saying, just to get this to your top of your email is perfectly fine. Everybody knows what it's like when it gets, all the way down to the bottom. So.
So I just wanted to follow up on something Cassandra just said, because I found that to be very important for myself. I was horrible at networking for the longest time until someone explained it to me a little bit different. Cassandra just said it, is networking isn't about what you can get out of it. If you look at it as what you can give to other people, how you can affect them, how you can help them via your networking. As soon as I stopped thinking of it as selfish for myself, then I could start doing it. So finding things for other people, connecting other people for various reasons. And then when they have something interesting, they'll think of you, it'll pop into their head. And to me, that's what networking is. And that's the only way I can personally do it. And then second, just being on the other side of getting a lot of cold calls on LinkedIn. So I used to answer every single person who would message me on LinkedIn. I would accept any friend request or link request, and I would also hop on any Zoom meeting because I wanted to make sure that I was never biased, so that I would only do it for people who were similar to me or had similar interests, et cetera, et cetera. But it just got to be too much eventually, so I had to stop. But if I'm going to stop, I have to stop for everyone. So I might bring it back, but I get so many nowadays that I don't think I just have the time to handle it.
Great. Okay, I think we have a number of questions that have popped up in the chat and another hand up, and our time is getting closer to the end of the hour, so we'll try to get through this quickly. First, just for the purposes of the recording, I wanted to mention that there was a message in the chat about the amazing industry mentorship program that is run by the APS. And so look it up if that is of interest to you, mentoring.aps.org/programs/impact. Okay, so then I'm going to go to the next question in the chat that was given to me. And that is that this person asks that they've seen many companies ask for experience in posted positions when applying for industry jobs. And they're wondering of your thoughts on whether it's good to do a postdoc before moving into industry and whether that would be helpful. So maybe I'll throw that one just to try to get through more questions. I'll throw that one to Cassie because she did do a postdoc before moving into industry.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the postdoc was an easy way to get back to San Diego because it's easier to find a postdoc than a job sometimes. And I got to do things that I thought that I enjoyed doing. So I was, working with a lot of microscopy. I think either, it depends. If you want to go into like a scientific role, it's definitely going to be valued. Your time as a postdoc, as an engineer, some people value it, some people don't as work experience. But I still continue to learn a lot, and I use all of those things still. So it depends on what the postdoc is and what you want to do next. Make sure that they're sort of matched or that you're getting something out of the postdoc, like experience related to like figuring out what you want to do. And the other thing is there are some professors who are very well linked to industry. And, finding those people is also really helpful for like the networking, finding jobs, getting the experience, et cetera.
I'll just add that when I review resumes personally, I don't look at postdocs as added experience above academia. I just think of it as continued graduate school work, more or less. Just when I'm reviewing resumes, FYI.
Great insight to have. Okay, we're going to do another one from the chat, and then we'll get to the raised hand. And I'm going to kind of group two people's questions together. Hopefully they're not offended, but they're trying to understand a bit of the differences between academia and industry. And so one question asks, have you found the working environment and scheduling flexibility? How do you find that in industry versus academia? Because academia tends to have flexibility, being able to take a weekend off, and as long as research is getting done, and maybe this is less, the flexibility is less so in industry. And maybe somewhat related to that in terms of academia versus industry, do you ever miss doing academic research in your respective fields? So if you want to comment on those differences. And maybe we'll start with Nakme this time.
Yeah, really great questions and insights from everyone. So about the first question, I think it really depends on the industry, and even within the same company, team to team and project to project can be very different. So it's hard to kind of generalize that certain like industry is less flexible or academia is. So my experience been the flexibility varies across projects, and there are tight deadlines, and there are like more flexible timelines that I've worked on. So it's a mix of both. And I think when you're looking for a job anywhere, like either in academia or industry, it's a legit question to learn about or ask about the work-life balance and the expectations, the schedule, and how the project developments are done, how the team works together. So that will give you a sense of if that work environment is for you, or it suits your lifestyle and situation that you are in. About the second question, if I ever miss academic work, actually, I decided to become a research scientist in a research focused team within industry to have both, because I really like research. I like ambiguity, and it makes the everyday job very interesting, because then you have to demystify it, and then you have to translate it into things and processes and tools that are tangible and communicate to other people. And that's something that I really enjoy, and I guess that fulfills my need of research. And we sometimes publish and sometimes don't publish, but there are teams that publish more and some teams publish less if you're a research scientist in industry. So that's also something to figure out. If you really like publishing and research, is something to figure out when you're interviewing with those teams.
Great, thanks. Do any of the other panelists want to add anything? If not, yes, Teddy.
Try to go quick. So just on the, do you ever miss doing academic research in your prospective fields? That was one of my biggest fears going out of academics. And, you know, for myself, it's, you know, in starting this company, I'm sure that there are a lot of other similar experiences within industry at large, but the sheer volume of new things to learn is amazing. And so the education really doesn't end. And for myself, it, you know, it was stuff that I hadn't encountered before. And so, you know, it was extremely rewarding. So it scratched my itch.
Great. All right. Liz, thank you for your patience. Your turn.
Yeah, I have a really like kind of a application question of some of your advice. So I'm really interested in science writing and research operations management. And I've found that making connections in those kind of even more distal to the traditional academic PhD kind of track, even more difficult because I don't really have those primary connections. Would you still say that like the best thing you can do is like network and try and stretch that network to other fields, or is it just like throwing your application or your resume out there even better than trying to make connections where you have very little standing?
So I'll chime in a little bit. When you have very little, I guess you said standing, which I would interpret as experience or demonstrated experience, I would argue that in this situation, networking is extremely important because you need to kind of prove, like the whole job application process is all about proving to someone that you can do whatever job they're doing. The whole reason to go to school, the whole reason to have a resume, get good grades, et cetera, is to try to prove this or to give indications. And the way I took what you said is that you don't think you have very good indications along those lines thus far, but you want to get them. So I would argue that the best way to do that is through networking in this case, is to talk to people and to show it just with your person as opposed to with the documents that you would end up submitting in an application. That's the best thing I can say. The other thing you mentioned is you mentioned management or operations. So I took that to be something like project management. And there are project management certificates that you can get, and that's another one of those indications. It's one of those signals that you could then use to start to get your foot in the door. Did that help, Liz, at all?
Yeah, that's actually pretty similar to the advice I had already given. I actually have experience in those fields. It's just I have never made it past that primary screening for any of my applications. I'm about to graduate, so I was just curious if I should lean more into the network rather than even more than I already have, which I think is great advice. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so thank you all. I think there are more questions that some people have had, but our time is up and everyone's time is precious. It is a finite commodity that we haven't figured out how to change that yet. There was one quick question, which was if people have follow-up questions, can they reach out? I know each of you has a LinkedIn profile. Is that the easiest way to reach out if there's an additional question? With the caveat that sometimes people's contacts get buried and, that's the way it goes. But
for me, if people just put APS something about this beforehand, that would be helpful if they want me to respond. Otherwise, I probably won't.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So thank you, everyone, to our 4 panelists for such varied views, but some very consistent threads throughout this meshwork of advice about your journeys and your advice to others, taking the time to answer panelists' audience questions. Thanks to our audience for your engagement and questions. And yeah, I hope we will see you at a future APSD Bio event. If there's other things like this that would be of interest, let us know. I know we have planned for January an event about postdocs and how to build your skills during a postdoc for different careers. And then a soft skills training type of focus in our February event, which ties into some of the advice that was given here. So stay tuned for information on those as they become solidified. And yeah, please join me in thanking the panelists once again. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Brian, Teddy, Cassie, Nachme, for participating in this. We will post a recording when it's available, so people can view that as well.
Thanks, Nancy.
Yeah,
Thank
appreciate you taking the time. Really, I learned a lot with good advice that I can then share with our grad students. So awesome. Thanks.
Thank you.